In the heart of London's historic grandeur, where centuries of monarchy blend with the pulse of modern life, a rare spectacle was about to unfold. For the first time in nearly 4 decades, a reigning sovereign would mount a horse and lead the charge through the streets, not in battle, but in a display of timeless pageantry. This wasn't just a parade. It was a king reclaiming a forgotten ritual, drawing millions into a moment where tradition met the man behind the crown, sparking curiosity about the human side of royalty and the enduring spirit of a nation. The sun rose gently over Buckingham Palace on that crisp June morning in 2023, casting a golden hue on the iconic building's facade. King Charles III, at 74 years old, felt a mix of excitement and quiet determination as he prepared for the day ahead. He had always been passionate about horses, a love inherited from his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, who had last ridden in such an event back in 1986. Now, as the new monarch, Charles decided to revive this tradition, becoming the first king in over 30 years to participate on horseback during Trooping the Color, the official celebration of the sovereign's birthday. Inside the palace, the atmosphere buzzed with activity. Aides hurried through the corridors, ensuring every detail was perfect. Charles met with his equerry to discuss the noble steed named Noble, a majestic black horse from the royal mews, specially trained for such occasions. The king adjusted his uniform, a striking red tunic adorned with medals and epaulets, while reflecting on the significance of the day. This wasn't merely a parade, it was a symbol of continuity, a way to honor the military and connect with the people. Outside, crowds began to gather along the mall, the wide avenue leading to Horse Guards Parade. Families waved Union Jack flags, tourists snapped photos, and veterans stood proudly, reminiscing about past parades. The air filled with anticipation as bands tuned their instruments. Prince William, the Prince of Wales, and Princess, and both experienced riders, prepared their own horses nearby, ready to join their father in this historic moment. As the clock ticked toward 10 a.m., Charles mounted Noble with steady grace. The horse snorted softly, sensing the energy. The king patted its neck, whispering words of encouragement. This ride would cover the short but symbolic distance to Horse Guards, inspected by over 1,500 soldiers, 300 horses, and 400 musicians. It was a test of poise under the world's gaze, blending personal passion with royal duty. The procession began with the rhythmic beat of drums echoing through the streets. Charles led the way, his posture impeccable, as the household division regiments followed in perfect formation. The crowd's cheers grew louder, a wave of sound that energized the king. He nodded acknowledgments, his face a blend of solemnity and subtle joy. At Horse Guards Parade, the vast open ground transformed into a sea of color. Red coats, shining helmets, and fluttering flags. Charles dismounted briefly to inspect the troops, walking the lines with purposeful steps, exchanging salutes and brief words with officers. The precision of the soldiers impressed him, a reminder of the dedication that upheld the nation's defense. Back on horseback, the king watched as the Welsh Guards trooped their color, the ceremonial flag, through the ranks. The music swelled, from stirring marches to the national anthem, filling the air with pride. Rain threatened, but held off, as if nature itself respected the occasion. As the parade concluded, Charles remounted for the return to Buckingham Palace. The family joined on the balcony for the RAF flypast, jets painting the sky in red, white, and blue. The king waved to the adoring crowds, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. In the days following, the event sparked global headlines, praising Charles for breathing new life into old traditions. It marked a pivotal moment in his reign, showing a monarch unafraid to embrace the past while forging ahead. The morning light filtered through the palace windows as King Charles III rose early, his mind already on the historic day. He had trained for weeks, riding Noble in private sessions to ensure harmony between rider and horse. Breakfast was light, tea and toast, shared with Queen Camilla, who offered encouraging words. "You'll make history," she said, squeezing his hand. Down in the stables, grooms polished saddles and brushed coats until they gleamed. Noble, a Canadian-bred horse gifted years ago, stood calmly, unaware of the role he played in reviving a lapsed custom. Charles arrived, dressed in his field marshal uniform, the weight of the bearskin hat familiar yet symbolic. The family gathered, William in his Welsh Guards attire, in her blues and Royals uniform, both mounting their horses with ease. They discussed the route, the Mall to Horse Guards, a path trodden by monarchs for generations. As 10 a.m. approached, the king stepped into the courtyard. Mounting Noble, he felt the stirrups firm under his boots. The gates opened, and the procession started, bands playing the British Grenadiers. Crowds lined the barriers, children on shoulders, phones raised high. Along the way, Charles spotted familiar faces, veterans saluting, families cheering. He kept his focus, guiding Noble through the throng. At Admiralty Arch, the view opened to Horse Guards, where the parade ground awaited. Upon arrival, the king halted, surveying the assembled troops. Dismounting, he began the inspection, row by row, noting the polished boots and steady gazes. Conversations were brief. "Fine turnout," he said to one captain. The trooping ceremony unfolded with the color being paraded, soldiers marching in unison. Charles remounted to oversee, the horse steady amid the noise. Rain began to drizzle, but the king remained composed, his uniform darkening slightly. The music crescendoed, evoking emotions of national unity. Returning along the mall, soaked but spirited, the procession reached the palace. On the balcony, with Camilla, William, Kate, and the children, they watched the fly past, historic planes followed by modern jets. The crowd's roar was deafening as the red arrows trailed smoke. Charles smiled, waving the day of triumph. Reflections came later, over tea. The king pondered how this ride bridged eras, inspiring future generations. Preparations had been meticulous in the weeks leading up to June 17, 2023. King Charles III consulted with military advisors, reviewing parade protocols that dated back to the 17th century. His decision to ride horseback was personal, a nod to his equestrian background, and a break from the carriage rides of recent years. At Windsor Castle, training sessions with Noble built trust. The horse, strong and reliable, responded to the king's gentle commands. Charles practiced the salute, ensuring his form was flawless. Back in London, rehearsals on Horse Guards parade saw soldiers drilling under the watchful eyes of officers. The Welsh Guards, chosen to troop their color, polished every button. On the eve of the event, Charles hosted a family dinner. William shared riding tips and recounted her own parade experiences. The mood was light, but underlying was the weight of expectation. Dawn broke clear, though clouds loomed. The king donned his uniform, medals clinking softly. Camilla adjusted his sash, her support unwavering. In the palace quadrangle, horses were saddled. Noble nickered as Charles approached, mounting with assistance. The family followed suit, forming the royal escort. The gates swung open at precisely 10 a.m., the procession commencing. Drums beat a steady rhythm, guards marching behind. Crowds swelled, estimates reaching hundreds of thousands. Charles waved occasionally, his expression warm. Reaching Horse Guards, the king entered the parade ground to fanfare. Dismounting, he inspected the lines. Foot guards, household cavalry, all impeccable. The ceremony proper began. The color trooped, slow marches giving way to quick steps. Charles watched from horseback, rain now falling lightly. Despite the weather, spirits remained high. The king's composure inspired the troops. As the parade wrapped, the return journey started. Soaked spectators cheered louder, appreciating the resilience. At the palace, the balcony appearance united the family. The flypast roared overhead, a spectacular finale. In quiet moments after, Charles journaled his thoughts, grateful for the day's success and the bond it strengthened with the public. The decision to ride had roots in Charles's lifelong love of horses. As Prince of Wales, he played polo fiercely, but this was different, ceremonial, public. Training intensified in May, with early mornings at the Royal Mews. Noble proved ideal, calm amid crowds. Military planners coordinated every element. 1,500 soldiers from 7 regiments, 300 horses groomed to perfection, 400 musicians rehearsing scores. The night before, Charles walked the palace gardens, contemplating his mother's legacy. She had ridden until 1986, then switched to carriages. Now he would honor that. Morning arrived with a buzz. Aides briefed him on weather, possible rain, but the show would go on. Uniform on, he met his siblings and son. And a skilled rider joked about keeping up. Mounting Noble, the king led out, the procession a river of color down the mall. At Horse Guards, the arena filled with precision. Inspection revealed dedication. Charles praised a young guardsman. The trooping unfolded. Escorts marching, the color saluted. From horseback, the king oversaw, rain pattering on his hat. The drizzle added drama, troops undeterred. Return procession saw larger cheers, the king's wave acknowledging loyalty. Balcony time brought family together. George, Charlotte, Louis behaving amid excitement. The fly past with typhoons and a BBMF Lancaster thrilled all. Post-event, receptions honored participants. Charles toasted the troops, the day a milestone in his reign. Echoes of history resonated as Charles prepared. Trooping the color originated in the 1600s, a way to display regimental flags. His choice to ride echoed George VI and earlier kings, a personal touch. Final rehearsals confirmed readiness. Noble was fed apples, a treat from the king. Family support was key. Camilla's presence steadied him. The day dawned, palace alive. Uniform fitted, Charles stepped out. Procession launched, music soaring. Crowds diverse, locals, tourists, united in celebration. Horse Guards arrival, trumpets blared. Inspection detailed, Charles noting diversity in ranks. Ceremony peaked with the march past, king saluting. Rain intensified, but cleared for the return. Balcony fly past, 70 aircraft, a nod to the coronation. Afterward, the king reflected on unity, the event fostering national pride. The parade's impact lingered. Media coverage highlighted the king's vitality at 74. Charles reviewed footage, pleased with Noble's performance. Public reaction was overwhelmingly positive, boosting monarchy's image. In private, he discussed with family how it set a tone for his era, active, connected. The day closed with quiet gratitude, a rare sight etched in history. The sun was just starting to rise over London on a cool June morning in 2023. Golden light touched the tall windows of Buckingham Palace and made the white stone walls glow softly. Inside the palace, everything felt busy but calm at the same time. Servants moved quietly through long hallways carrying trays of tea and fresh flowers. Guards stood straight in their red coats. Everyone knew today was not an ordinary day. King Charles III woke up earlier than usual. He was 74 years old now, but his eyes still showed the same spark they had when he was a young prince who loved horses more than almost anything else. He sat on the edge of his bed for a moment, thinking about the day ahead. Today he would do something no king had done in a very long time. He would ride a horse through the streets of London and lead the famous Trooping the Color Parade at Horse Guards Parade. His mother, Queen Elizabeth II, had last done it on horseback more than 35 years earlier. After that, she always rode in a carriage. Now Charles wanted to bring the old tradition back, not because he had to, but because he loved it and because he believed people needed to see their king close to the old ways. He stood up, walked to the window, and looked out. Below him, the gardens looked peaceful, with dew still shining on the grass. In the distance, he could hear the faint sound of horses' hooves on stone from the Royal Mews stables. That sound made his heart beat a little faster. Horses had always been his escape, his joy, his quiet friends since he was a small boy. Even when the world felt heavy with duty and cameras, a good ride could make everything feel right again. Queen Camilla was already awake. She came into the room, carrying 2 cups of tea. She smiled at him the way she always did when she knew he was nervous, but trying not to show it. "You're going to look splendid today," she said in her warm voice. "And Noble is ready for you. He knows his king is coming." Charles took the tea and nodded. "Thank you, my dear. I just hope the rain stays away. The forecast is not kind." Camilla laughed softly. "Even if it pours, the British people will still cheer louder than ever. They love seeing you on a horse. It reminds them of stories from long ago." He sipped the tea and felt the warmth go down. She was right. The people loved tradition, but they also loved seeing the human side of their king. Today they would see both. Down in the royal mews, the stables were alive with movement. Grooms brushed the coats of more than 300 horses until every hair shone like black silk or rich chestnut. Saddles were polished so much that you could see your face in them. Bridles had brass fittings that caught the light. In one corner stood Noble, the big black horse chosen for the king. Noble was calm and strong, with kind eyes and a steady nature. He had carried important riders before, but today was special. Today he would carry the king himself. One of the head grooms, a man named Robert who had worked with horses for the royal family for 30 years, ran his hand along Noble's neck. "Easy boy," he whispered. "Big day today. Be good for his majesty." Noble flicked an ear and stood still, as if he understood every word. Upstairs in the palace, Charles finished his light breakfast of toast, marmalade, and more tea. He did not eat much before riding. Too much food made it harder to sit straight in the saddle for a long time. After breakfast, an equerry helped him dress. First came the white breeches, then the tall black boots that reached almost to the knee. Next, the red tunic of the Welsh Guards, covered with gold braid and shining medals from years of service. On his shoulders sat heavy gold epaulets. Around his waist went a gold belt with a sword. Finally, the tall black bearskin hat, the kind that made guards look so grand. When it was all on, Charles looked every inch a king from another age. He caught his reflection in a tall mirror. For a moment he paused. The man looking back was older than the boy who used to gallop across fields at Balmoral, but the same love for the horse and the open air was still there. "Ready, sir?" the equerry asked quietly. "Ready," Charles answered. He walked through the palace corridors with steady steps. Servants bowed as he passed. A few smiled because they knew how much the day meant to him. Outside in the quadrangle, the air felt fresh. Horses stood in a neat line. Their riders, officers from different regiments, sat tall in their saddles. Prince William was already mounted on his own horse, wearing the uniform of the Welsh Guards. Princess Anne sat on her horse nearby, dressed in the blue uniform of the Blues and Royals. Both of them looked calm and proud. "Good morning, Papa," William said with a small smile. "Morning, William. Ready for this?" "Always, sir," and gave her brother a quick nod. "Don't let Noble get too excited when a band starts. He likes the drums." Charles laughed. "I will keep him in line." He walked over to Noble. The horse turned his head and blew softly through his nostrils. Charles stroked the smooth neck and spoke low words only the horse could hear. "We're going to do this together, old boy. Nice and steady." A groom held Noble's reins. Another man stood ready to give the king a leg up. Charles placed his left foot in the stirrup, swung his right leg over, and settled into the saddle. The moment he sat down, he felt a familiar balance. The horse shifted slightly under him, finding his weight, then stood calm again. It was a good sign. The clock on the palace wall showed 5 minutes to 10. The household division was already forming up along the mall. More than 1,500 soldiers in red tunics and black bearskins stood in perfect lines. 300 horses waited with their riders. 400 musicians from different bands held their instruments ready. The whole scene looked like a painting that had come to life. A signal was given. The great gates of Buckingham Palace opened slowly. The sound of iron on stone echoed. Charles touched his heels lightly to Noble's sides. The big black horse stepped forward. Behind him came the royal party. William, Anne, and rode close. Then came other members of the royal family and senior officers. As they passed through the gates, the crowd, waiting outside, erupted. Thousands of people lined both sides of the mall. Children sat on their parents' shoulders. Flags waved in every hand. Phones and cameras pointed toward the king. Cheers rolled like waves. There he is. Look at the king on horseback. He looks wonderful. Charles kept his face serious at first, the way tradition expected. But when he saw small children jumping up and down, waving tiny flags, the corners of his mouth turned up just a little. He raised his hand in a gentle wave. The cheers grew even louder. The procession moved down the mall at a steady walk. The wide road looked like a river of color. Red coats, gold braid, shining swords, black horses, white plumes on helmets. The sound of hooves on the road mixed with the deep beat of drums from the bands. Every few minutes a trumpet call rang out, sharp and clear. Charles sat very straight. His back did not touch the saddle. His hands held the reins lightly, but firmly. Noble walked with long, even steps, ears pricked forward, listening to everything around him. The horse felt the excitement in the air, but stayed calm because his rider stayed calm. Halfway down the mall, the king saw a group of old soldiers standing together. They wore medals from wars long past. When Charles rode close, they came to attention and saluted sharply. He returned the salute, holding it for a moment longer than usual. Their eyes met his. No words were needed. Respect passed between them like an old promise kept. Further along, he noticed families from many different countries. Tourists from America, Japan, India, France, all waving and smiling. One little girl held up a handmade sign that said, "We love you, King Charles." He pointed at the sign and gave her a bigger wave. Her face lit up like the sun. The noise grew louder as they neared Admiralty Arch. From there, the view opened wide. Straight ahead stood Horse Guards Parade, the big open ground surrounded by old buildings. Already the troops were in position on the gravel square. Lines of foot guards stood like statues. The household cavalry waited on the sides with their silver breastplates gleaming. In the center, a small platform waited for the king. Charles felt a quiet thrill in his chest. This was the moment he had thought about for months. This was the moment millions of people around the world would watch on television and remember for years. The procession reached the end of the mall. Trumpets sounded a fanfare. The king guided Noble through the archway and onto the parade ground. The moment the horse's hooves touched the gravel, the whole square seemed to hold its breath. Charles rode forward alone for a few paces. Then he halted. Every eye in the place turned to him. Soldiers snapped to attention. Officers saluted. The crowd outside the railings cheered so loudly it sounded like thunder. For a second, the king sat still on his horse, looking out over the sea of red coats and shining helmets. Then he raised his hand in salute. The salute was returned by every officer on the field. The band struck up "God Save the King." Everyone sang. The words rose into the morning air and mixed with the beating of drums. Charles lowered his hand. Noble stood rock steady. The king felt proud, not just for himself, but for every man and woman standing on that ground, for every person watching from home, for the long line of history that had led to this day. The inspection was about to begin. He touched the reins lightly. Noble stepped forward again. The king rode slowly along the first line of troops. He looked at each face, each polished button, each straight back. He nodded to officers he knew. He spoke a few quiet words here and there. "Well done. Splendid turnout. Thank you for your service." The soldiers answered with "Yes, Your Majesty," or "Thank you, sir," in low voices full of respect. Row after row he passed. The rain that had been threatening all morning started to fall, soft at first, then a little harder. Drops landed on his bearskin hat and ran down the red tunic. He did not flinch. Neither did the soldiers. They stood like stone while water dripped from their mile peaks. Charles finished the last line and turned Noble back toward the center of the field. The horse shook his head once, sending drops flying, then settled again. Now the main ceremony would start. The Welsh Guards would troop their color, the special flag that carried their battle honors. It was an old ritual, one that went back hundreds of years to the time when soldiers needed to see their flag clearly so they knew which regiment they belonged to in the smoke of battle. The band changed the tune. A slow, proud march filled the air. The escort for the colors stepped forward. 6 soldiers marched with perfect timing, rifles on shoulders, bayonets fixed. In the middle walked the ensign, carrying the flag. The silk cloth was bright, protected inside its case to keep it safe from rain. They moved across the gravel in slow steps. Every footfall was the same. Every arm swung the same distance. The king watched from horseback, his face calm but his eyes sharp. When the color reached the center, the troops presented arms. Rifles came up together with one loud snap. The flag was unkissed slowly. The silk caught the wind for a moment, then hung straight. Everyone on the field saluted the color. Charles saluted too, holding the position until the flag was safe again. The march past began. Company after company stepped off, boots hitting the ground in perfect time. Quick march, slow march, eyes right as they passed the king. Charles kept his hand at the salute. Noble stood like a statue, only his ears moving when the music swelled. Rain fell harder now. Uniforms darkened. Water ran down faces. But no one broke step. No one complained. The pride was stronger than the weather. Charles felt it deep in his chest. These men and women were not just doing a job. They were showing the world what duty looked like. And he was part of it. When the last company passed, he lowered his hand. The band played one more stirring tune. Then, silence fell for a moment. The king turned Noble toward the exit. The royal party formed up behind him. The procession would now return to Buckingham Palace along the same route. As they left Horse Guards Parade, the crowd outside cheered again, even louder than before. People clapped and waved wet flags. Some sang. Others just stood smiling through the rain, happy to have seen something so rare. Charles rode at the front, back straight, face calm. Inside, he felt something warm and bright. Today had not been easy. The rain, the long ride, the eyes of the world. But it had been right. The gates of Buckingham Palace came into view. The family would soon stand on the balcony together. The flypast would roar overhead. The day would end with smiles and handshakes and quiet thanks. But for now, the king rode on, hooves steady on wet stone, heart full of the simple truth. Tradition was alive, and he had helped keep it breathing. The rain kept falling as King Charles III turned Noble back toward the center of Horse Guards Parade. The big black horse moved with calm steps through the wet gravel. Water dripped from the edge of the king's bearskin hat and ran down the back of his red tunic. It soaked into the gold braid and made the metal shine in a different way. But Charles did not mind. The rain felt like part of the day now, like an old friend who shows up uninvited but still welcome. All around him the soldiers stood without moving. Their red coats had turned darker from the water. Their black bearskin hats looked heavier with rain. Yet every back stayed straight. Every chin stayed high. No one wiped their face. No one shifted their feet. They had trained for this. They knew the eyes of the world were watching. More important, they knew their king was watching from horseback right in front of them. Charles guided Noble along the next line of troops. He looked carefully at each man and woman. He saw young faces fresh from training camps. He saw older faces lined with years of service. He saw different skin colors and different accents when they spoke. The British Army had changed over the years, but the pride had stayed the same. He stopped in front of a young guardsman who looked barely 20. The boy's boots shone like mirrors even in the rain. His rifle rested perfectly on his shoulder. Charles leaned down a little from the saddle. "Fine work, soldier," he said in a quiet voice. The young man answered without moving his eyes, "Thank you, Your Majesty." Charles gave a small nod and moved on. Those 2 words carried weight. They would stay with the young guardsman for the rest of his life. Further along the line, Charles saw a woman officer standing tall in the foot guards. Her uniform was perfect. Rain ran down her face, but she did not blink. When the king reached her, he paused again. "You lead from the front," he said. She answered, "Yes, sir." "Always." He smiled just enough for her to see it, then rode on. The inspection took time. Charles wanted it to. This was not a quick walk past rows of people. This was his chance to show respect to every person who gave their time and sometimes their safety to serve the country. He spoke to colonels and captains. He spoke to privates and lance corporals. He asked short questions about their units, where they came from, how long they had served. The answers came back clear and proud. When he reached the household cavalry, the horses stood even stiller than the men. The silver breastplates gleamed wet under the gray sky. The troopers sat with long swords at their sides, and plumes of white horsehair waving gently from their helmets. Charles knew many of these riders. Some had ridden with him in private hunts years ago. He gave them a special nod as he passed. "Good to see you all," he said to one captain he knew well. The captain saluted sharper than before. "And you, sir." Noble felt the change in mood. The horse lifted his head a little higher and stepped with more pride. Charles patted the thick neck once. "Good boy," he whispered. At last the inspection ended. Charles rode back to the center of the parade ground. The rain had eased into a soft drizzle now. A weak sun tried to push through the clouds, but gave up quickly. The king halted Noble and turned to face the troops. A trumpet sounded, clear and sharp. Then the band changed its music. The slow, heavy beat of a march rolled across the square. It was time for the trooping of the color. The Welsh Guards moved first. They had been chosen this year to show their regimental color, the special flag that carried the names of battles fought long ago. The flag lived in a special case most of the time to keep it safe. Today it would come out into the open air for everyone to see. 6 soldiers stepped forward to act as escort. They marched in perfect time. Their boots hit the gravel together. Rifles stayed on shoulders. Bayonets caught what little light there was. In the middle walked the ensign, the young officer chosen to carry the color. He held the staff straight and steady. His face showed no feeling, but his grip was tight. They moved across the wide square. Slow steps. No ruse. Every movement looked the same as the one before. The king watched from horseback. His own horse stood quiet now, ears forward, listening to the music. When the color party reached the center of the field, the whole parade presented arms. One loud snap echoed as 1,500 rifles came up at the same moment. The king raised his hand in salute. He held it there while the color was unkissed. The silk flag came out slowly. Red and gold threads caught the wet air. For a second the flag lifted in a small breeze, then hung still. The names of old battles, Inkerman, Sevastopol, Tel El Kabir, appeared in gold letters. Those names told stories of courage and loss. Everyone on the field looked at the flag. Soldiers saluted. Musicians held their instruments still. Even the horses seemed to understand. Charles kept his salute until the flag was safe again. Then he lowered his hand. Noble shifted his weight, but stayed in place. Now the real march past began. The companies stepped off one after another. First came the slow march. Boots came down soft and even. Arms swung slow and controlled. Eyes looked right toward the king as they passed. Charles kept his hand at the salute again. He looked at each face as the soldiers went by. He saw sweat mixed with rain. He saw pride mixed with effort. He saw youth mixed with experience. One company after another passed. The Grenadier Guards, the Coldstream Guards, the Scots Guards, the Irish Guards, each one different in small ways, but all the same in discipline. The music kept them in step. Drums rolled, pipes played. The sound filled the square and rose above the rooftops. When the quick march started, the pace changed. Boots hit harder, arms swung higher. The soldiers moved like one body. Charles lowered his salute only when the last company had passed. Then he turned Noble slightly to watch them form up again on the other side. The rain stopped completely now. A weak rainbow appeared for a moment over the old buildings around the parade ground. Someone in the crowd outside pointed and cheered. The sound spread. More people clapped. The king heard it and felt something warm inside. He looked across at the family members who had joined him on horseback. William sat straight on his horse, face serious, but eyes bright, and looked calm, as always, her uniform perfect, even in the wet. They had done this many times before, but today felt different. Today, their father led on horseback. Today, the king had chosen to ride. Charles gave them a small nod. They nodded back. The ceremony moved toward its end. The color was marched back to its place. The escort stepped away. The band played one last slow tune full of feeling. Then, silence fell over the square for a few seconds. A single word of command rang out. The troops came to attention again. Another command, and they stood at ease just enough to relax without losing shape. Charles rode forward a few steps. He wanted the soldiers to hear his voice clearly. Men and women of the household division, he began his voice carrying across the wet ground. Today you have shown the world what duty looks like. You have stood in rain. You have marched in perfect order. You have honored your colors and your country. I am proud of every one of you. A low murmur of thank you, Your Majesty, rose from the ranks. He continued, this tradition goes back many centuries. It reminds us who we are and what we stand for. You keep it alive. Thank you. The words were simple, but they landed deep. Soldiers straightened even more if that was possible. Officers saluted again. Charles turned noble toward the exit. The royal party formed behind him. William and rode close. Other family members followed. The gates opened. The procession started back down the mall toward Buckingham Palace. The crowd had grown bigger while the ceremony took place. People stood 5 and 6 deep along the barriers. Many held umbrellas now, but most did not care about the wet. They wanted to see the king ride past again. They wanted to cheer louder than before. As Charles appeared through the arch, the roar started. It rolled down the wide avenue like a wave. Flex waved fast. Children jumped. Adults clapped until their hands hurt. The king rode at the front. His posture stayed perfect. His face stayed calm. But now he waved more often. He saw faces he recognized from the way in. He saw new faces full of joy. He saw old veterans with tears in their eyes. He saw families holding small children high so they could see better. One boy, no more than 6 years old, stood on the barrier with his father. The boy waved a tiny Union Jack flag with all his strength. Charles looked right at him, pointed, and gave a big smile. The boy froze for a second, then waved even harder. His father laughed and hugged him tight. Further along, a group of schoolgirls in bright raincoats screamed with excitement. Charles waved to them too. They jumped up and down shouting his name. The rain had left puddles on them all. Nobles splashed through them without missing a step. The sound of many hooves mixed with the cheers. It made a music all its own. Halfway back, Charles saw another group of veterans. They stood together again, medals shining on their coats. When he rode close, they saluted as one. He returned the salute, holding it long. Their eyes met across the short distance. Respect passed between them, silent and strong. The palace gates came closer. The crowd noise grew even louder. People pressed against the barriers, trying to get one last look. Phones stayed raised high. Cameras flashed, even in daylight. Charles guided Noble through the gates. The iron closed behind him with a soft clang. The noise of the crowd became a dull roar outside the walls. In the palace quadrangle, the family dismounted. Grooms took the horses away. Charles stood for a moment, feeling the ache in his legs from the long ride. But it was a good ache, the kind that came from something worthwhile. William walked over and put a hand on his father's shoulder. Well done, Papa, he said quietly. Charles smiled. Thank you, William. It felt right. And joined them. You looked every inch the king, she said. And Noble was perfect. Charles nodded. He was a fine horse. They walked together toward the palace doors. Inside, the halls felt warm after the wet outside. Servants waited with towels and dry coats. Queen Camilla met them at the entrance. You are soaked, she said, but her eyes were bright. Worth it, Charles answered. They went upstairs to change before the balcony appearance. The flypast would come soon. Planes old and new would fly over in formation. The family would stand together and wave to the crowds below. But for now, in the quiet of the palace, Charles allowed himself a moment to think. The rain, the cheers, the salute, the color, the march past, all of it played again in his mind. He had ridden at the head of his troops. He had spoken to his soldiers. He had felt the weight of history and the warmth of the present at the same time. He looked out a window toward them all. People still stood there waving flags, even though the main part was over. They waited for the balcony moment. Charles turned away from the window. He felt tired but happy. The day was not finished yet. There was more to come. The king walked toward his rooms to change into dry clothes. His boots left wet prints on the carpet, but no one minded. Outside, the rain had stopped completely. A soft sun broke through at last. It touched the wet flags and made them shine. The day was young still, and the story of this rare sight was only halfway told. The family walked up the wide staircase inside Buckingham Palace. Their boots left small wet marks on the thick red carpet. Servants stood quietly along the walls holding fresh dry towels and warm coats. The air inside felt warm and dry after the cold rain outside. It smelled of polished wood, old books, and faint flowers from vases on every table. King Charles III felt the ache in his legs now. Riding for so long in the wet had made his knees stiff. But the ache was small compared to the feeling in his chest. Pride mixed with quiet joy. He had done what he set out to do. He had ridden noble at the head of the parade. He had looked into the eyes of his soldiers. He had felt the weight of the crown in a new way. Queen Camilla waited at the top of the stairs. She had changed into a light blue coat and hat. Her face lit up when she saw him. "You look like a drowned king," she said with a soft laugh. Charles smiled back, but a happy one. She stepped close and brushed a drop of water from his cheek. "Come on, let's get you dry before the balcony. The planes will be here soon." They walked together down a long hallway lined with paintings of past kings and queens on horseback. Charles glanced at them as he passed. George VI had ridden in parades like this. So had George V and Edward VII. Now his own face would join them in the history books. The thought made him stand a little taller. In his private rooms, a valet helped him out of the wet uniform. The red tunic came off heavy with water. The bearskin hat sat on a stand like a tired soldier. Charles changed into a dry tunic, still red, but lighter for the balcony. No heavy metals this time, just the simple sash of the Order of the Garter. He kept the same boots because there was no time to change them. Camilla helped adjust his tie. "You did wonderfully today," she said. "The people loved it. I could hear the cheers from here." "I heard them too," he answered. "It felt good. Real." They talked for a few minutes about small things. How Noble had behaved. How William had looked so proud. And had joked about the rain being good for the skin. Simple words that made the big day feel closer to home. A knock came at the door. An equerry stepped in. "Your Majesty, the family is gathering for the balcony. The flypast is due in 12 minutes. "Thank you," Charles said. "We are coming." He offered his arm to Camilla. She took it with a smile. Together, they walked toward the balcony doors. The rest of the family waited in the room behind the famous balcony. Prince William stood near the window, already in a dark suit. Princess Catherine was beside him in a soft cream coat and hat. Their 3 children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, bounced with excitement. George wore a little suit like his father. Charlotte had a blue dress with white flowers. Louis kept tugging at his tie until his mother gently fixed it. Grandpa, the children shouted when they saw Charles. He bent down to their level, even though his knees complained. "Hello, my dears," he said. "Did you watch from the window?" "Yes, Grandpa," George answered. "We saw you on the big black horse. You looked like a storybook king." Charles laughed. "I felt like one too." Charlotte stepped forward. "Did the rain make Noble sad?" "No," Charles said. "Horses like a bit of rain. It cools them down." Louis looked up with big eyes. "Will the planes make a big noise?" "Very big," Charles told him. "But exciting." The children grinned. They loved the flypast more than anything. William came over and shook his father's hand. "It was a good day, sir. The troops looked sharp." "They did," Charles agreed. "And you rode well, William." And joined him next. She had changed into a green dress, but still wore her riding boots underneath. She gave her brother a quick hug. "You made history today," she said. "First king on horseback in decades. Mama would have been proud." Charles felt a small lump in his throat. "I thought of her the whole time." The doors to the balcony opened. Fresh air rushed in, carrying the sound of the crowd below. Hundreds of thousands of people still filled the mall. Flags waved like a colorful sea. Cheers rose as the family appeared one by one. Charles stepped out first with Camilla at his side. The roar grew louder. People pointed and waved. Phones flashed like tiny stars. Charles raised his hand in a steady wave. Camilla waved to her, smile wide and warm. William and Catherine followed with the children between them. George and Charlotte waved with both hands. Louis copied them, jumping a little on his toes, and came last, waving in her calm way. The family stood together along the balcony rail. Charles in the center, Camilla beside him, William and Catherine on one side, and on the other, the grandchildren in front where they could see better. Below, the crowd stretched as far as the eye could see. People climbed on barriers. Others sat on shoulders. Everyone looked up with happy faces. Some sang songs. Others chanted the king's name. The energy felt alive like electricity in the air. Charles looked out over it all. He saw old people with tears in their eyes. He saw young families smiling wide. He saw tourists from faraway countries holding flags they had bought that morning. All of them here for this one moment. A distant rumble started in the sky. The sound grew closer fast. The first planes appeared low over the rooftops. Old warbirds from the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight led the way. A Lancaster bomber with its 4 engines roaring. 2 Spitfires and 2 Hurricanes flew tight beside it. Their wings caught the weak sun and flashed silver. The crowd cheered louder than ever. Children pointed. Adults clapped. The planes flew straight over the mall low enough to see the pilots wave. Charles saluted as they passed. The family waved hard. The children jumped up and down. More planes followed. Modern jets from the Royal Air Force. Typhoons in tight formation. Their engines screamed. They flew faster than the old ones, leaving white trails in the sky. Then came the Red Arrows, the famous display team. 9 bright red planes painted with blue and white stripes. They flew in perfect shapes. First a heart, then an arrow, then loops and rolls that made everyone gasp. Smoke in red, white, and blue streamed behind them. The colors painted the sky over London. The crowd roared approval. Phones stayed raised to catch every second. Louis tugged at his grandfather's sleeve. "Look, Grandpa, rainbows in the sky." Charles looked down and smiled. "Yes, my boy, rainbows for all of us." The flypast lasted only minutes, but it felt longer. Each group of planes brought new cheers. When the last jet disappeared over the horizon, the crowd kept clapping. They did not want the day to end. Charles turned to his family. His eyes were bright. "What a sight," he said quietly. William nodded. "The best one yet." Catherine smiled at the children. "You behaved so well up here." George looked serious. "I want to fly in one of those planes one day." "You might," Charles told him, "if you work hard." The family waved one last time to the crowd. People below waved back, shouting thank you and God save the king. Slowly, the family stepped back inside. The balcony doors closed behind them. Inside, the room felt quiet after the noise. Servants brought tea and small sandwiches. The children ran to a window to watch people slowly leaving the mall. Charles sat in a soft chair for the first time that day. His legs thanked him. Camilla sat beside him. "You must be tired," she said. "A good tired," he answered. "The kind that comes from a full heart." They drank tea and talked about the day. How Noble had stayed calm in the rain. How the young guardsman had stood so straight. How the flypast had made the children laugh. After a while, Charles stood up. "I think I will go see Noble before he goes back to the stables." Camilla smiled. "Tell him he was the real star." Charles walked down to the Royal Mews. The stables smelled of hay, leather, and horse. Grooms were brushing coats and cleaning tack. Noble stood in his stall, eating quietly. The king walked over. Noble lifted his head and nickered softly. "Hello, old friend," Charles said. "You did well today." He stroked the horse's neck. Noble pushed his head against the king's shoulder like a thank you. "You never flinched," Charles continued. "Not once. Even with all that noise and rain." A groom came over. "He's a good one, sir. Steady as they come." Charles nodded. "He is. Thank you for looking after him." He stayed with Noble for a while, just standing there, man and horse. No words needed. When he finally left the stables, the sun had come out fully. It dried the puddles on the courtyard stones. Birds sang in the trees. Charles walked back into the palace. The day was winding down. Guests would come later for receptions. Speeches would be made. Toasts would be raised. But for now, in this quiet hour, the king felt peace. He had ridden through the streets on horseback. He had led his troops on the parade ground. He had stood with his family above the cheering crowd. He had watched planes paint the sky. It was a rare sight, and it had touched something deep in the heart of the nation. People would talk about this day for years. Children would read about it in books. Historians would write about it as the moment a king brought an old tradition back to life. Charles stopped at a window and looked out one more time. The mall was emptying now. Flags still waved in the breeze. A few people lingered, taking last photos. He smiled to himself. The parade was over, but the memory would stay, bright and strong, like the sun that finally broke through the clouds.